If you dance this waltz with me without stumbling, I shall marry you here before the entire court." Duke Edward Ashford of Pembroke's voice sliced through the refined air of Thornfield Manor's grand ballroom like a whip crack. The crystal chandeliers bathed Yorkshire's nobility in golden light, casting dancing shadows across marble floors polished to mirror perfection. Lords in military coats adorned with medals glittered like constellations, while ladies draped in diamonds and silk shimmered like living jewels. The spring ball of 1862 was meant to celebrate England's glory, but what unfolded that night would expose something far darker hidden beneath the glittering surface. Have you ever been in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? That's exactly what Grace Whitmore had endured for 3 long years. Edward stood at the center of the ballroom, his golden monocle catching the candlelight, his smile a blade of arrogance sharpened by privilege. He extended his gloved hand with theatrical slowness, as if offering bread to a dog begging at his table. The gesture drew a wave of cruel laughter that crashed against the gilded walls, echoing through corridors where servants had learned to make themselves invisible. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with cigar smoke and champagne. Violins paused mid-note. The conductor's baton hung frozen in the air. Every eye in the ballroom turned to follow Edward's gaze, and the weight of those stares fell like stones upon a single figure standing in the shadows behind emerald velvet curtains. Grace Whitmore. To Yorkshire's aristocracy, she was nothing more than furniture, the governess to the Duke's daughter, dressed in a severe black uniform that marked her as clearly as a brand. Her hands, which moments before had been straightening the silver tray of champagne flutes, now trembled slightly, but it wasn't fear that made them shake. What no one in that glittering ballroom could possibly know was that this trembling wasn't weakness. It was the earthquake before the storm. She was 24 years old, though the hardships of the past 3 years had carved shadows beneath her blue eyes. Those eyes held secrets that no title could buy, depths that no amount of mockery could reach. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a tight bun, not a strand out of place, the discipline of servitude etched into every aspect of her appearance. But beneath that humble exterior, beneath the worn black fabric and the white collar that marked her station, something fierce was awakening. Perhaps you know someone like Grace. Someone forced to hide who they truly are just to survive. Or maybe you've been that person yourself. "Come, servant girl!" Edward's voice rang out again, his steps theatrical as he advanced toward her. The crowd parted like a sea before him, eager to witness the spectacle. "You polish my daughter's shoes, but never smile. Perhaps that's because you know nothing beyond scrubbing floors." His laugh was sharp, designed to cut. "Dance with me, and if you can follow this waltz without disgracing me, I'll wed you at Westminster tomorrow." The ballroom erupted. Laughter cascaded from the balconies above, where younger nobles leaned over railings to get a better view. Lady Catherine Fairfax, draped in rubies that cost more than most families earned in a lifetime, pressed a silk fan to her lips to hide her grin. "How delicious," she murmured to the gentleman beside her. "He's truly outdone himself this time." "The poor girl will faint from terror," replied Lord Harrison, his moustache twitching with amusement. "I'd wager £50 she runs from the room." "Too cruel, even for Edward," commented the Dowager Duchess Margaret from her throne-like chair at the head of the ballroom. But her voice was soft, lost beneath the waves of mockery, and she made no move to stop her son. She merely watched, her aged fingers tight around her cane, her expression unreadable. We've all witnessed cruelty masked as entertainment, haven't we? That moment when laughter stops being funny and becomes a weapon. Grace stood motionless. The silver tray felt like lead in her hands. Around her, other servants had melted further into the shadows, their eyes filled with pity and relief that Edward's cruelty had not this time selected them. The head butler, Mr. Henderson, gave her a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't," it said. "Don't give them the satisfaction." But something was happening inside Grace's chest. A door she had kept locked for 3 years, bolted, chained, buried, was beginning to crack open. Behind it lay memories she had tried to bury, a past she had been forced to abandon, a life stolen by the very man now mocking his daughter. And with those memories came a voice that had been silent for far too long. What secret do you think was hiding behind those calm blue eyes? What could possibly give a servant the courage to face an entire court? The voice of her father, Lord James Whitmore, a nobleman whose estate had been stolen, whose reputation had been destroyed, whose heart had been broken by the very man now mocking his daughter, rose from that locked place like a ghost returning home. "Dance with your heart, my darling," his voice echoed across time and death. "They may take our estate, but never our Grace." Grace's fingers slowly released the tray. She set it down on a nearby table with deliberate care, each movement precise, controlled. The room's laughter began to fade, replaced by uncertain murmurs. Something in her demeanor had shifted, and the crowd sensed it the way animals sense an approaching storm. She lifted her head. Her blue eyes, which had learned to stay downcast for 3 years of survival, now met Edward's directly, and in that gaze, something flickered that made the Duke's smile falter for just a fraction of a second. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose, which made her more dangerous than anyone in that glittering ballroom could possibly understand. "I accept your challenge, Your Grace," Grace said. Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying across the now silent ballroom like a church bell on a windless morning. The silence that followed was absolute. Have you ever heard a silence so complete that it felt like the world was holding its breath? That's what filled Thornfield Manor in that moment. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to lips. Fans ceased their fluttering. Even the servants standing along the walls froze in place, their eyes wide with shock and something else, something that might have been hope. Edward blinked, momentarily caught off guard. He had expected her to refuse, to flee, to give him exactly what he wanted, her humiliation and his entertainment, but this calm acceptance disrupted his script. Still, he recovered quickly, his arrogance refueling his confidence. She would fail. Of course she would fail. The Viennese waltz was the most complex dance in English repertoire, requiring years of training and practice. What could a governess possibly know about such refinement? But what Edward didn't know, what no one in that ballroom suspected, was about to change everything. "Splendid!" he exclaimed, turning to address the crowd with arms spread wide. "It seems our little servant has courage, if not sense." This drew renewed laughter, though it sounded slightly hollow now. "Maestro!" He snapped his fingers at the conductor. "The Viennese Waltz, your most challenging arrangement." The orchestra shifted, musicians exchanging glances. The conductor raised his baton with visible reluctance. The first notes floated into the air, delicate, precise, demanding. The waltz began slowly, almost teasingly, like a predator circling its prey. Edward strode toward Grace with exaggerated ceremony, his boots clicking sharply against the marble. He bowed with mock courtesy, hand extended. When Grace placed her hand in his, he immediately gripped it too tightly, a subtle assertion of dominance. His other hand found her waist with possessive force. "Relax," he whispered with theatrical irony, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Just try to keep up. When you fail, and you will fail, I'll make sure you land somewhere soft, perhaps in the scullery where you belong." But Grace did not flinch. She did not tremble. Her hand remained steady in his, her posture straight as a blade. And when the waltz truly began, when Edward took that first confident step intended to throw her off balance, something impossible happened. She followed, Not stumbling, not struggling. She flowed with the music as naturally as water follows gravity. If this story has already touched something in your heart, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And leave your like so we can keep bringing stories that remind us all of our own hidden strength. The crowd leaned forward collectively, their mockery dissolving into confused fascination. How could this be happening? How could a servant move with such grace? Edward's confidence transformed into concentration. He tried a quick turn, a move designed to disorient inexperienced dancers. Grace pivoted with mathematical precision, her worn black skirt sweeping across the floor in a perfect arc. The gasps were audible now, rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Where did you learn this?" Edward hissed between clenched teeth, his smile now painted on with effort. Grace said nothing. Her eyes had taken on a distant quality, as if she were seeing not the ballroom but another place, another time, and in truth, she was. The memory came unbidden, sharp and sweet as broken glass dipped in honey. She was 11 years old again, standing in Whitmore Hall's grand ballroom, the same ballroom that had been stripped and sold after her father's ruin. Late afternoon sunlight poured through tall windows, painting the parquet floor in squares of gold. Her mother, Lady Catherine Whitmore, beautiful in a simple day dress, was teaching her the waltz. "The secret, my darling," her mother said, guiding Grace's small feet through the steps, "is not to think. Don't count. Don't plan. Just listen to the music and let it carry you. The waltz is a conversation between souls." Young Grace stumbled, apologizing quickly, but her mother only laughed, warm and bright as sunshine. "Mistakes are how we learn. Again, and this time, close your eyes. Trust the music. Trust yourself." The scent of her mother's rose perfume, the softness of her hands, the security of being held by someone who loved you unconditionally. Grace had practiced every day for years, dreaming of the ball where she would dance as a debutante, where she would take her place among society. Maybe you remember a time when someone you loved taught you something precious, a skill, a lesson, a piece of themselves that lives on in you even after they're gone. But that dream had died with her father's disgrace. Died when Duke Edward had conspired with corrupt bankers to destroy the Whitmore fortune, to steal their lands, to scatter their name to the winds of scandal and debt. Her father's last words before he walked into that winter storm and never returned. "They cannot take who you are, Grace. Remember that. They can take everything else, but never who you truly are." The memory released her, and she was back in Thornfield Manor, no longer the helpless girl whose world had been destroyed. The music swelled, violins crying out in complex harmonies that demanded expertise to navigate. Edward tried another difficult sequence, the reverse pivot turn, a movement mastered only by dancers trained in Vienna's finest schools. The next moment would shock everyone in that ballroom. Grace executed it flawlessly. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Lord Harrison choked on his champagne. Lady Fairfax's fan clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the sudden hush. Even the musicians seemed surprised, their playing growing more confident, more passionate, as if inspired by what they were witnessing. This wasn't just dancing anymore, this was revelation. Edward's face had gone red. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He was no longer leading the dance, he was being led, though subtly enough that most observers might miss it. Grace's feet knew the waltz as intimately as breathing. Every step her father had taught her, every lesson her mother had given, every hour spent practicing in the now sold ballroom of her childhood, it all lived in her muscles, in her bones. "This isn't possible," Edward muttered, his theatrical confidence crumbling into genuine confusion. "You're a servant, a nobody." Grace finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of 3 years of silence. "I was Lady Grace Whitmore before I was your governess, before you destroyed my family, before you killed my father." The words hit Edward like a physical blow. Have you ever seen the moment when a bully realizes they've picked the wrong target? When arrogance meets consequence? His step faltered. For a crucial moment he stumbled, his perfect aristocratic composure shattering like glass. Grace, meanwhile, glided on, forcing him to recover quickly or risk falling before the entire court. The ballroom that had erupted in mockery now sat in stunned silence. The dance had transformed from entertainment into revelation, from spectacle into something approaching judgment. Those who knew the Whitmore scandal, and most did, though they had never connected the governess to that fallen house, began whispering urgently to their neighbors, "Whitmore's daughter. But I thought she was here all along." Edward knew. Impossible! The Dowager Duchess. Margaret's eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been shame. She had known the Whitmores, had attended Grace's christening. How had she not seen? How had none of them seen? Because we see what we expect to see, don't we? A uniform makes someone invisible, while a title makes them important. But what if we've had it backwards all along? The waltz raced toward its conclusion, the music building to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the manor. The crystal chandeliers trembled, casting fractured light across the spinning dancers. Grace moved with impossible grace. Her simple uniform somehow transformed in the eyes of the watchers into something noble, something dignified. What would happen next would become the talk of England for years to come. Edward tried one last desperate move, a sharp turn meant to throw her completely off balance. Instead, Grace used his momentum against him. She spun with such precision that Edward, unable to match her skill, twisted awkwardly. He didn't fall, but everyone saw it. The moment of failure, the instant where the Duke was bested by the governess. The final notes rang out. Grace ended in a perfect curtsy, her breathing calm, her posture impeccable. Edward stood 3 feet away, disheveled, breathing hard, his confidence in ruins around him like shattered glass. The silence stretched. No one moved. No one dared breathe. And then, from the throne-like chair at the head of the ballroom came the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. The Dowager Duchess Margaret was applauding. The effect was immediate and electric. As if a dam had broken, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. It started tentative, uncertain, but quickly grew into a thunderous ovation that shook the chandeliers. Lords and ladies who moments ago had been laughing at Grace's expense now rose to their feet, their hands coming together in acknowledgement of something they had just witnessed, something that transcended mere dancing. This was justice. This was dignity reclaimed. This was the moment when the invisible became undeniable. Grace remained in her curtsy, her eyes downcast, but inside, her father's voice echoed, "They cannot take who you are." She had proven it. Before the entire court of Yorkshire, she had reclaimed her grace. Edward stood frozen, his face cycling through expressions, confusion, anger, humiliation. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The crowd's applause was not for him, it was for her. His mockery had become his undoing, his cruelty transformed into his exposure. Finally, Grace straightened. She turned to face Edward fully, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the now attentive ballroom with perfect clarity. "Keep your offer, Your Grace." The words fell like stones into still water. "My father, Lord James Whitmore, taught me that true nobility is not inherited, but earned through honor." She paused, letting the weight of his name, the name Edward had tried to erase, sink into the consciousness of everyone present. A lady never accepts a proposal made in mockery. You know what real dignity looks like now, don't you? It's not in titles or estates. It's in standing tall when everything has been taken from you. The revelation rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Whitmore. She was a Whitmore. Murmurs became conversations, became exclamations of shock and increasingly of outrage. Edward knew who she was. He had her working as a servant after what he did to the Whitmore estate. This is beyond scandal. This is cruelty. The king must hear of this. The Dowager Duchess rose from her chair, her aged frame suddenly regal with purpose. She moved through the crowd, which parted before her like wheat before wind. When she reached Grace, she did something that shocked the assembly even more than the dance had. She embraced her. "Grace Whitmore," the Dowager Duchess said loudly, ensuring every ear heard. "I knew your mother. I remember when you were christened at St. Mary's. I remember your father's honor." She turned to face her son, her expression hardening into something ancient and terrible. "And I remember what was done to destroy them." Edward's face had gone from red to white. The implications were crashing down upon him like an avalanche. The crowd's mood was shifting from confusion to anger, from amusement to condemnation. The very people whose approval he had craved were now turning against him. Lord Harrison stepped forward, his earlier mockery replaced with solemnity. "Edward, is this true? Did you knowingly employ the daughter of the man whose estate you acquired under questionable circumstances?" We all know what it's like to watch someone's mask slip, don't we? To see the truth beneath the performance. Edward tried to recover, tried to summon his old arrogance. "She needed employment. I provided it. Should I be condemned for charity?" "Charity?" Grace's voice cut through his excuses like a blade through silk. "You stole everything from my family. You conspired with bankers to forge documents claiming my father owed debts he never incurred. You spread lies about his honor until he couldn't show his face in society. And when he walked into that winter storm and never returned, you purchased our lands for a fraction of their worth." Her voice remained steady, but her hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with the force of finally speaking truth after years of silence. "And then, when I had nowhere else to go, no name to call upon, you hired me to raise your daughter. So you could see me scrubbing floors, so you could enjoy my family's complete destruction every single day." The silence that followed was deafening. Even those who had benefited from the Whitmore scandal looked uncomfortable. The upper classes might tolerate many things, but this was beyond the pale. This was cruelty of a magnitude that shocked even the jaded aristocracy. If you've ever wanted to speak truth to power but couldn't find the words or the courage, you understand what Grace felt in that moment. Her voice was speaking for all of us who've been silenced. The Dowager Duchess's voice, when she spoke, carried the authority of age and position. "Edward, you will make a public apology, and you will restore what can be restored. The king himself will hear of this if necessary." Edward looked at his mother, then at Grace, then at the sea of faces watching him, with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination. He had been exposed. His game had backfired spectacularly. The servant he'd tried to humiliate had instead revealed him as a monster. He began, then stopped. What could he say? Deny it? The truth was written in Grace's eyes, in the way the Dowager Duchess stood protective beside her, in the condemning stares of the very society whose approval he craved. But what came next surprised everyone even more. Grace, watching him struggle, felt a strange emptiness. She had imagined this moment for 3 years, the moment of confrontation, of revelation, of justice. But now that it had arrived, she felt only tired and free. "I don't want your apology," she said quietly. "And I don't want Whitmore Hall back. It's tainted now by what you did." She turned to address the crowd directly, her voice growing stronger. "I wanted only one thing tonight, to dance the waltz my mother taught me, the waltz my father loved. To prove to myself that they had not taken everything, that I was still Grace Whitmore, even in a governess's uniform." She walked toward the ballroom doors, her head high. The crowd parted before her with a respect they had never shown when she was merely a servant. As she reached the threshold, she paused and turned back one final time. Nobility isn't in titles or estates, Grace said, her voice carrying through the silent ballroom like a benediction. It's in how we carry ourselves when everything is stripped away. My father taught me that. I hope you all remember it when you lie down in your silk sheets tonight and close your eyes. I hope you remember that the servants you never see, the people you mock, they are someone's daughter, someone's son. They are Grace. If this moment moved you, if Grace's courage reminded you of your own strength, comment below and share this story. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful reminders that dignity can never be truly stolen. The young woman who walked out into that April night was no longer invisible. She had danced with her father's memory, honored her mother's teaching, and reclaimed the name they had tried to erase. And with that, she walked out into the night, leaving behind a ballroom full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. The scandal that erupted from the Spring Ball of 1862 became legendary across England. The king, informed by the Dowager Duchess herself, ordered a full investigation into the Whitmore estate sale. Documents were uncovered proving Edward's conspiracy. Forged ledgers, bribes to bankers, falsified debts. He was forced to make financial restitution and public apology, his reputation in ruins, his name associated forever not with nobility, but with the cruelty that masqueraded as it. Grace Whitmore never accepted the restored Whitmore estate. Instead, she used the compensation to open a school for displaced nobility, children whose families had fallen on hard times, young people who had lost everything but their dignity. She called it Whitmore Academy, and there she taught them that grace could not be bought or sold, that true worth came from within. The academy became famous throughout England, producing graduates known not for their wealth, but for their character. Grace taught them music, literature, mathematics, but more importantly, she taught them that their value didn't depend on others' recognition. That even in a servant's uniform, even when invisible to the world, they remained exactly who they were. Years later, when someone asked if she regretted not accepting Duke Edward's apology or reclaiming her ancestral home, Grace smiled, the first genuine smile many had seen from her since childhood. "He gave me something far more valuable than an apology," she said, her blue eyes bright with something that might have been wisdom or might have been peace. "He gave me the chance to dance one more time with my father's memory, to honor my mother's teaching. He thought he was offering humiliation. Instead, he gave me back myself." And in the school she founded, in the grand ballroom where students practiced their waltz steps, there hung a single portrait, Lord James Whitmore, standing tall in his formal dress, his hand extended in invitation to dance. His face wore an expression of quiet dignity, the kind that comes from knowing who you are regardless of what life takes from you. Beneath it, an inscription in Grace's own hand read, "They may take our estates, but never our grace." The students would pause before that portrait, before their recitals, before their examinations, before any moment that required courage. They would look at Lord Whitmore's calm face and remember, nobility is not inherited. Dignity is not granted by others. Grace is something you carry within, something no duke or duchess or king can ever steal. Have you ever wondered what your own ballroom moment might be? That instant when you finally stop hiding who you truly are. This story reminds us all that the measure of a person's worth isn't found in their titles or possessions, but in the dignity they carry through darkness. We've all faced moments where we felt invisible, moments where we were judged by what we lack rather than who we are. Grace's story is a reminder that our true value can never be taken from us, only temporarily hidden, waiting for the moment when we choose to reclaim it. You are part of a community that believes in these truths, that every person has inherent worth, that dignity transcends social status, that the invisible among us carry stories of breathtaking courage. Together, We remember what the world too often forgets. The servant scrubbing floors might have once been nobility. The quiet person in the corner might harbor extraordinary gifts. The one everyone overlooks might be precisely the one who changes everything. Grace's waltz echoes through time, reminding us that the music never dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to dance it again. If you believe in stories of dignity triumphing over cruelty, if you've ever felt invisible in a crowd of people who should have seen you, leave your like and share this with someone who needs to remember their own grace today. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you never miss stories that remind us all. Nobility is earned, not inherited, and true grace cannot be destroyed by any earthly power. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had a moment where you stood up for yourself after being invisible for too long? Your story might inspire someone else who's still waiting for their courage to arrive. We're all in this together, learning to dance with grace, even when the world tells us we don't belong on the ballroom floor.